The silence is deafening. The USA, the self-appointed tutor of rights and democracy across the world, has been completely mum on the attacks on minorities in Bangladesh. The latest display of this gag was the dropping of the mention of Bangladesh and atrocities against Hindus from the readout on the Modi-Biden talks. Why is the US avoiding being critical of the situation in Bangladesh under the military-backed caretaker government, which is led by Muhammad Yunus? Experts see India and the US, two strategic allies, not being on the same page on Bangladesh, and suggest that India needs to keep that in mind going ahead. In fact, when it comes to India's interest in Bangladesh, the US has been in the opposite camp. It tried to prevent the liberation of Bangladesh from Pakistan in 1971 and then sided with political parties that were pro-Pakistan. It has always backed the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or the BNP, during whose rule anti-India forces found Bangladesh a safe haven. It is also believed that the US worked over the years to undermine the Awami League rule under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Well, according to geostrategist Brahmachalani, the US sought to prevent the birth of Bangladesh. But even today, it is not on the same page with India regarding Bangladesh. It has welcomed the recent regime change there and been silent on ongoing human rights abuses, including attacks on minorities, arbitrary arrests, forced resignations, and physical assaults on political detainees. On August 26, American President Joe Biden called up Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had returned from a visit to war-torn Ukraine. The crisis in Ukraine and Bangladesh were among the issues discussed by them. The Indian readout mentioned that PM Modi and Biden expressed their shared concern over the situation in Bangladesh, while the White House readout was mum on the issue and focused only on the Ukraine-Russia war. The statement by India's Ministry of External Affairs on the Modi-Biden talks read, "They," that is Prime Minister Modi and Biden, "emphasized the restoration of law and order and ensuring safety and security of the minorities, particularly Hindus, in Bangladesh." Though countries often highlight issues that are important to them, experts have noticed the strategic silence of the US on the post-Hasina chaos in Bangladesh. The days of anarchy following Sheikh Hasina fleeing Bangladesh saw hundreds of targeted attacks on minorities, especially Hindus. PM Modi, while congratulating Yunus for taking over as the head of the caretaker government, spoke about ensuring the safety of Hindus in Bangladesh. Yunus himself has admitted to the targeting of minorities and visited Dhaka's historic Dhakeshwari temple to reassure the country's Hindu community, indicating that the law and order situation in Bangladesh is far from normal. Students have fought pitched battles with members of Bangladesh Ansar Bahini, a paramilitary force, and forced dozens of officials and teachers to resign. So the question is, how did the US systematically weaken Sheikh Hasina government, and why? What could be the reason for the US's silence on the crisis in Bangladesh and the attacks on Hindus there? For one, it has pounced on every opportunity to point fingers at India over rights. A Bangladeshi American political analyst and faculty at Dallas University, Shafqat Rabi, told IndiaToday.in, the US systematically weakened Sheikh Hasina over the last decade. US official statements, reports from US domiciled Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and various US-aligned media and NGO around the world gradually downgraded Hasina from a role model of female empowerment to one of the world's rare female despots. This gradually reduced Hasina's overseas footprint and allies. Europe, for example, was more tolerant of Hasina's excesses earlier on due to her secular credentials, but that was made unsustainable due to US activism. Rabi, who has an extensive network in Bangladesh, says the US Embassy in Dhaka regularly held sessions with the civil society, diaspora opinion makers, social media influencers to keep hopes of a democratic rejuvenation alive. Rabi adds, once Hasina constrained all her domestic political opponents, keeping the desire for democracy alive via such engagement was the long-term strategy US utilized to systematically weaken Hasina's standing in Bangladeshi society and even abroad. By weakening Hasina, the US might have been creating ground for a favorable government at the right time. It should also be remembered that Muhammad Yunus was viewed as part of the 111 depoliticization process, which is seen to be an American plan for regime change in Bangladesh. 111 refers to the process initiated on January 11, 2007, by which a military-backed caretaker government assumed charge in Bangladesh on the eve of the general election. For 2 years, it tried to work on what is referred to as the -2 formula to get rid of the top two political players, Sheikh Hasina and Khalida Zia of the BNP. After the violent nationwide protests, it is Yunus who is at the helm of the caretaker government, and the wife of a high-ranking advisor to the caretaker government also works in the US Embassy in Dhaka. So the question is, why US isn't ready to acknowledge the post-Hasina chaos? Shafqat Rabi explains how several people from the American network made it to the caretaker government in Bangladesh. He says Hasina effectively silenced and brought into her patronage network the entire civil society, the media and bureaucrats, except for only a few who were independent and are still vocal. When the students toppled her government, there were not very many known people with the acceptability to even face the students in person, let alone be proposed by them for an advisor's job. The 15-year-old long authoritarian rule silenced most of Hasina's credible critics. After having worked to undermine the Hasina administration and seeing a government that has people aligned to its interests, the US would think twice before being critical of the new setup in Bangladesh. The Biden administration was on August 12 questioned as to what steps it has taken to stop the atrocities against Hindus in Bangladesh, given that two Democrat lawmakers had written to President Biden on the very same issue. Neither this elicited strong condemnation nor a promise to act. It is obvious that having spoken and worked against the Awami League government, now the US would not readily admit to the post-Hasina crisis in Bangladesh. Be it Afghanistan or Iraq, the US has throughout the 20th century tried to establish democracy and left those countries in a shambles. Even the 2018 anti-quota agitation against then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is seen to have had an American imprint. Student leader Nurul Haq Noor came out of nowhere to become the vice president of Dhaka University's Central Students' Union. Despite the Awami League's students' organization, the Chhatra League, dominating campus politics. Noor played a key role in the 2018 quota reforms agitation, which forced the Hasina government to withdraw the reservation in government jobs. A former Indian diplomat to Bangladesh told India Today that Noor was close to American embassy officials in Dhaka and was seen as propped up by the US. But the bigger worry is that US interests do not align with India's in South Asia. Now, being next door, Bangladesh is very important for India strategically and for security reasons. Any disturbance, there is going to be an impact on India as well, whereas the US, located 13,000 kilometers away, is immune to any crisis in Dhaka. Bangladesh is one among the countries where India and the US aren't on the same page. Brahmachalani says shared interests in the Indo-Pacific or US support for Indian engagement with Ukraine cannot obscure the fact that in India's own neighborhood, extending from Myanmar to the Pakistan-Afghanistan belt, American interests do not align with core Indian interests. So the experts now warn India needs to be careful going ahead. How the US is capable of engineering changes in India's neighborhood has already been talked about. US Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lu visited Dhaka in mid-May and met politicians and civil society leaders. It was in June that Bangladesh was in the throes of unprecedented protests against the ruling party. It was the same Lu who was blamed by Imran Khan for trying to topple his government. Remember what Imran Khan had said in March 2022 in a live televised address? we got a message from America. Oh, not America. I mean a foreign country I can't name. While reports also name Donald Lu as the person who influenced the internal politics in Nepal and also in Sri Lanka. The security experts warn that India would be in a difficult situation both internally and externally if the US decides to treat it as a non-aligned transactional partner instead of a reliable strategic ally. While the role of the US in the regime change in Bangladesh, like in other countries of the region, is very shady, some experts believe there are enough hints of how it acted. Against this backdrop, US's silence on the post-Hasina chaos in Bangladesh and the attacks on Hindus there can be explained. Do tell us what you think about this video in the comment section, and for more news updates, subscribe to India Today.